Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey into something truly astonishing, your brain.
Yeah, it's the most complex thing we know, really.
Just picture this like beautiful symphony, maybe 100 billion neurons all firing together, constantly, building the reality we experience.
It's incredible when you stop and think about it.
And here's a powerful thought to kick us off. Every single experience you have, every new thing you learn, every feeling,
hmm
it subtly shifts that activity.
hmm
So as we get into this, consider this. By the end, you might literally actually never be the same.
That's a profound idea, isn't it? How tied we are to this biology.
It really is.
And that dynamic nature, that's where things get really interesting. For a long time, the view, even in neuroscience, was that the brain was, well, fixed hardware.
Like a computer.
Exactly, like a computer. Once it's built, it's static. But we're about to explore how that whole idea is being turned on its head, something much more adaptable, really awe-inspiring.
That's a huge shift. So our mission today is to explore this concept, neuroplasticity,
Right.
the brain's amazing ability to change, to rewire itself. And this isn't just theory, is it?
No, not at all. It's actually revolutionizing treatments for all sorts of conditions. Things like depression, addiction,
And even opening doors to like self-improvement.
potentially, yeah. And for this deep dive, we've gathered some fascinating insights from a leading neuroscientist. Really gives us a front row seat to this revolution.
Okay, so let's unpack this, and let's start with a really wild personal story from our source material.
Okay.
This researcher, he fell in love with the brain young, like 16. Years later, doing a new MRI experiment, he discovered something pretty startling.
Oh, what was that?
He was genuinely shocked, really shocked, to find he had a significant hole in his brain. About 30% of his cerebellum was just missing.
30%, wow. And the cerebellum has, what, 80% of all neurons?
Exactly. But here's the kicker. He experienced absolutely no change. In his life, his perception, nothing felt different to him.
That's remarkable. And what's fascinating here is how that personal discovery really sparked his interest in the brain as this dynamic, flexible system.
Right.
He realized there's this kind of collision between what your brain is supposed to do, its blueprint, and what's actually dealt.
Like the missing cerebellum part.
Yeah. And somehow it just finds a middle ground. It adapts. It compensates.
Okay, if that wasn't mind-bending enough, let's talk about Cameron Mott.
Ah, yes. An extraordinary story.
Just after she turned 3, Cameron started having these violent seizures. They got worse and worse, and eventually she lost her speech. Doctors diagnosed Rasmussen's encephalitis. It's rare, severe, usually affects just one side of the brain.
And the only real treatment is pretty radical.
Extremely radical. A hemispherectomy. They literally remove half of her brain.
Off the brain.
And remember, one half controls movement and sensation on the opposite side of the body. So the expectation was she'd be hemiplegic, paralyzed on one side.
Right. That's the standard outcome you'd expect. But that's not quite what happened, is it?
Not at all. Here's the truly miraculous part. Just 4 weeks after the surgery, Cameron walked out of the hospital.
4 weeks. It's incredible.
Now, she still deals with challenges, of course, the hemiplegia, some peripheral vision loss, but she can run around with other kids. She's cognitively quite deft.
Yeah. And the source uses this powerful analogy. If I gave you half a car or half a phone, well, you wouldn't be going anywhere.
It'd be broken. 50% equals broken for most things.
Exactly. But for Cameron, somehow 50% is almost equal to 100%. And the how is key here.
Right. How is that possible?
The remaining part of her brain, it sensed that massive loss of tissue, and it physically rewired itself. It reorganized to take over everything the other half used to do.
Physically rewired. That almost defies common sense, thinking about a body part working like that. Does this mean our brain is always doing this subtle rewiring, even without major trauma?
Exactly. That's the crucial point. Cameron's case is extreme, but it highlights something fundamental. This dynamic nature isn't just for recovery. It's how we learn, how we adapt, how our daily lives shape us. And that brings us back to neuroplasticity. It formalizes this idea of constant change.
So it's the brain's ability to change itself, to actually rewire.
Precisely. It shatters that old idea of the brain as static hardware, like a computer chip.
Which was the prevailing view for so long.
It was. But it's not fixed hardware. There's structure, yes, but it's dynamic, flexible biology.
So this inherent ability, neuroplasticity, it's not just a biological marvel. It opens up possibilities, right? The big question is, what if we could actually hack into that ability?
Hack into the rewiring process itself.
Yeah. Not just for trauma recovery, but maybe to actively treat complex conditions like depression.
Right. And that's a great example because the traditional approach, really since the 1950s, has viewed depression as, well, a fixed hardware
A
problem.
chemical imbalance.
It's essentially, yeah, a deficiency of happy neurotransmitters, right? Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. And this led to all the antidepressants we know, MAOIs, tricyclics, SSRIs.
And they do help many people.
Oh, absolutely. They are marvels of modern medicine. About 2/3 of people see some symptom relief.
But that still leaves a huge number struggling.
It does. Our source mentions 1.5 million people in the U.S. alone still struggling, disconnected from family, friends. It's a truly debilitating disease.
Okay, so that's the chemical approach. What if we look at it through the lens of neuroplasticity instead?
Instead of just boosting chemicals generally, we identify specific brain regions that show different activity patterns in depressed patients.
Like an area being less active than it should be.
Exactly. For instance, a key area for executive function, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, often seems less active.
So what can we do about that using plasticity?
This is where the new approach comes in. Using electromagnetic currents, things like gentle magnetic pulses from devices placed on the scalp.
Transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS?
TMS is one example, yeah. We can use these techniques to induce neural rewiring in those specific areas. So if an area is underactive, we stimulate it, we pulse it over several sessions.
To essentially upregulate it, boost its activity.
Precisely, to kind of nudge the brain back towards more normal patterns of behavior. And there's some really promising work here. Dr. Jonathan Downer at the University of Toronto. His work shows a remarkable 33% remission rate for treatment-resistant depression.
Treatment-resistant. So these are people who haven't found relief from therapy or standard antidepressants.
Exactly. People who are really running out of options. So a 33% remission rate is huge for that group.
And our source mentioned a key advantage here over drugs, right?
Yes. Well, drugs are very specific at the molecular level, hitting just the right receptor. Their delivery is often general. They go everywhere in the body.
Leading to that long list of side effects you hear about.
Right. Neuroplasticity approaches, though, they target very specific, sometimes large patches of the brain. But they tend to leave the rest of you alone. Fewer systemic side effects.
That makes sense.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, we're really seeing a kind of personal medicine revolution. Just like we can sequence genomes relatively cheaply now.
These neuroplasticity treatments can be tailored.
Very specifically. We can find just the right stimulating pulse for John, or the right target area for Jenny. There's flexibility because, let's face it, we're all as different on the inside, probably more different than we are on the outside.
It sounds a bit like science fiction, almost.
It kind of is, science fiction coming true. We're at the frontier of non-invasively rewiring a brain for certain mental disorders.
That's incredibly compelling. So, okay, if devices can help rewire the brain, the next big question is, could we possibly help our brain rewire itself using just our own thoughts?
The power of the mind itself.
Yeah. Is that feasible? This is the idea behind something called real-time neurofeedback, right?
Exactly. Let's take cocaine addiction as an example from the source material.
Okay.
With real-time neurofeedback, you might show subjects tempting images of cocaine to activate their craving networks.
Trigger the craving.
Right. Then you give them real-time feedback, maybe a visual display showing what their brain, specifically that craving network, is actually doing moment by moment.
So they can see their own brain activity related to craving.
Yes. And the goal is for them to learn to sort of surf their own mental landscape, to find mental strategies or states that make that craving activity go down.
So they're consciously trying to control it.
It exploits whatever conscious control you have, and probably in most cases a lot of unconscious control too. You're using biofeedback to intelligently guide the brain's rewiring at just the right moments.
Fascinating. This also seems to touch on some really complex, maybe even controversial areas, like the legal system.
It does. The source brings up how our understanding of neurochemistry is getting so good that we can use drugs to change mood states, to change behavior.
And he makes the point that we're, in a sense, already disarming criminals with drugs, which sounds very 1984.
It does sound stark, but he gives a concrete example. Chemical castration. In California and many other states, It's mandated for certain reoffending sex offenders.
They're forced to take medication like medroxyprogesterone acetate.
Yes, to reduce libido. And the data suggests it is effective in reducing reoffense rates. The point here isn't about the morality, which is complex and deserves its own discussion.
Right, we're just reporting what the source material discusses.
Exactly. The point is, chemically altering brain states to influence behavior is already happening.
So how does neuroplasticity fit into that legal or rehabilitation picture?
Well, it presents another potential avenue, an incredible option perhaps for rehabilitation. If we can alter brain states chemically, what about using neuroplasticity for more lasting behavioral change?
Instead of just suppressing something chemically.
Right. Instead of just warehousing criminals, as the source puts it, society can start asking, is there any possibility for this person to be rewired or to rewire themselves? It opens up a different kind of conversation about rehabilitation.
And moving beyond fixing deficits or problems, what about self-improvement? Using this understanding to, say, boost our own impulse control or long-term planning or focus.
That's the exciting frontier, the vision of a biofeedback mental gym.
A mental gym, I like that.
Yeah, where you could potentially work on behavioral issues or enhance cognitive functions with the same kind of targeted effort you'd use lifting weights.
Lifting your behavioral problems, what are the main hurdles to making that kind of mental gym a reality right now?
Well, a big one is scaling these kinds of individualized approaches, making them accessible and affordable. And, we're still mapping out the precise brain circuits for every single behavior or cognitive function. It's complex.
Still early days in some ways.
Definitely. But the underlying principle that our brains can be actively shaped intentionally, that points to a really exciting future for self-improvement, not just treating disorders.
Okay, there's one more application of neuroplasticity from the source material that is truly remarkable. Let's try a quick thought experiment.
Okay, I'm ready.
Imagine you have earplugs in, totally blocking sound, and someone is trying to mimic baby sounds, gurgles, coos, cries. Could you tell what they're doing just by watching their lips?
Probably not very well. Lip reading is hard enough for normal speech.
Exactly. And babies. They can make sounds without moving their mouths much at all, or maybe they have a pacifier or a toy in their mouth.
Right, it would be almost impossible to lip read a baby accurately.
And this leads to a really profound real-world challenge. Over 90% of deaf parents have hearing children.
That's a statistic that really makes you pause.
It creates this potential divide, doesn't it? Because the parents can't easily engage in that traditional back-and-forth baby talk.
And we now know that baby talk isn't just, cute or annoying parental behavior.
Yeah.
It's actually specifically designed by nature.
To teach language.
To teach language, yes. And also, crucially, to foster connection, that parent-child bond. If that communication channel is difficult or absent, it creates a real issue.
So the question Dr. Ariana Anderson and the researcher at UCLA posed was, if you can't get those infant sounds in through the ears, is there another way, another option?
And what's genuinely captivating here is what brain scans have shown us about how the brain adapts.
Okay.
When blind individuals read Braille, you don't just see the touch-related areas of their brain lighting up. You actually see visual areas activating too.
The visual cortex.
Right, even
when they're
right.
blind.
Yes, and similarly, when deaf individuals use sign language, it's not just their visual areas processing the gestures. Their auditory cortex often becomes active as well.
Wow. So the brain is repurposing areas.
It seems so. It suggests the brain isn't just plastic in a random way. It's intelligently plastic. It rewires itself to maximize the information it can get from the world using whatever pathways are available. It learns to, in a sense, see Braille and hear sign language.
Okay, that's incredible. And this general idea is called sensory substitution.
Exactly. Taking information usually handled by one sense, translating it into a format another sense can understand.
And letting the brain figure it out. People like Paul Bach-y-Rita, David Eagleman, they've done amazing work with this.
They have. And this is the core idea behind the Chatter Baby application developed at UCLA.
Okay, Chatter Baby. What does it do?
It essentially turns auditory information, the baby's sounds, into visual information. It's a form of sensory substitution.
So the baby's chatter comes alive visually.
Yeah, on a screen, perhaps. So even if the baby's lips aren't moving, the deaf parent can see what's going on vocally.
And the goal?
The goal is for parents to use this tool to learn the patterns of baby talk, to connect more deeply, and maybe, eventually, to effectively hear their child through sight, thanks to that intelligent plasticity.
Wow. bridging that gap.
It really shows the power of plasticity to connect people.
And there was another aspect to this challenge for deaf parents, wasn't there? Understanding the baby's mood when they're not in the room.
Right. Think about standard baby monitors. The best ones might tell you there's sound or no sound.
Which isn't very helpful. Is the baby happy, hungry, in distress?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell you what you really care about as a parent.
So how does Chatterbaby address that?
Well, they gathered this huge database, the world's largest, apparently, of infant sounds, and using sophisticated math, algorithms.
Machine learning, maybe?
Probably, yeah.
No.
They analyze the sound patterns to predict the baby's likely mood state. Is the baby hungry? Are they crying because they're fussy or because they're in pain? Are they happy?
So it gives the parent much richer information than just sound detected.
Much richer. It's another way plasticity, combined with technology, can make a real difference in connecting deaf parents with their babies.
So we've touched on depression, addiction, sensory impairments, using neuroplasticity, but the source suggests that's really just the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. We're starting to see its relevance explored for diseases you might not immediately think of, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke recovery is becoming a much broader field.
And this is where the term neurohacking comes in again.
Yes, and maybe we should clarify that term a bit. When we say neurohacking, it doesn't mean these aren't, carefully researched, evidence-based approaches. It's more in the sense that we're not always trying to fix the underlying problem at the most basic molecular level.
Not fixing every single nut and bolt.
Exactly. We're not necessarily trying to change every single biochemical cascade that might be going wrong. I mean, think about it. Your brain has maybe 100 trillion connections.
A staggering number.
And each connection is like a city with maybe 1,000 different chemical processes happening. Trying to fix things at that micro level across the whole brain is, well, it's an impossibly difficult problem for many conditions. Instead, some of the biggest advances, the things we've talked about today, are about exploiting this unique, incredible quality of the brain itself.
Its ability to rewire, to reallocate, to adapt based on what it needs.
Precisely. Leveraging the brain's own inherent plasticity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the core idea we've really explored is this astonishing and really uniquely personal power of neuroplasticity. Your brain isn't some fixed machine you're stuck with. It's a living, adapting system. It's constantly being shaped by your experiences, your environment, maybe even your intentions.
It truly is. And maybe this raises an important question for you, our listener, to think about in your own life.
Okay.
Where in your life, maybe with a problem you're facing or a change you want to make, are you waiting to understand every single little nut and bolt, every tiny nuance before you decide to actually do something to solve it, to make that change?
Getting stuck in analysis paralysis, maybe.
Perhaps. Maybe we should take a lesson from neurohacking here. Instead of focusing only on what's broken or what doesn't work, or waiting for perfect understanding, maybe we should focus on using what does still work, leveraging our existing strengths and abilities to get the results we actually want.